If you thought the actor strike was over, well, you're almost right, but I have the latest on some last-minute drama right now. Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my coverage of the waning days of the SAG-AFTRA strike of 2023, and I know a lot of you are saying, well, wait a minute, Dan, that strike was settled weeks ago. Well, yes and no. There was a tentative agreement that was reached a few weeks ago, but it has not yet been ratified by the union, and that's what I want to talk about today, the reason why that final vote isn't exactly a done deal, and the major sticking point for many actors when it comes to approving or disapproving of what the negotiators are able to achieve. The news of the tentative deal actually broke right as I was leaving for New Zealand, and I figured that by the time I got back, it would be old news. There really wouldn't be anything left to cover, but this played out a lot differently than the end of the writer's strike did just a few months ago. So let's rewind almost a month back to November the 8th, which was when that tentative deal was announced and work was permitted to resume the next day. Movies were back in production, stars were back on the publicity circuit just in time for award season, and it seemed like everything was right with the world. However, the initial celebration that a tentative deal had been reached was tempered in the next few days, largely because the terms of that deal had yet to be presented to the members of the SAG-AFTRA union. And an early indication that there would be some controversy was the vote on November 10th of the SAG-AFTRA board to authorize the deal, which only passed with 86% approval, which is a significant number for a process that's usually just a rubber stamp that allows the deal to go to the full membership for a vote. Usually it's a 100% approval. Maybe you'll have one or two people that decide that they don't like the deal, but 86% of the SAG-AFTRA board translates to reportedly 9 of the 75 board members who said that they would not authorize the deal to go back to members for ratification, which means that they wanted the negotiators to go back to the table for better terms. On November 12th, SAG-AFTRA released an 18-page summary of the deal that outlined what the negotiators have been able to get without the actual contractual language, which was still being hammered out. But public opposition was already growing inside the union, and it was surrounding largely the provisions regarding artificial intelligence, or AI, which we will cover in depth in just a few minutes. Actor Matthew Modine has emerged as a vocal critic of the deal, as has actress Justine Bateman, though Modine may also be motivated by a personal vendetta. He ran against Fran Drescher for president of SAG-AFTRA back in 2021 and lost a bitter campaign. Yes, that's right. SAG-AFTRA does have two-party elections, and they are some of the most dramatic contests that you've ever seen in your life. And as hard as it is to believe, it is very possible that the course of entertainment business history was likely changed because The Nanny was able to get 5 percentage points more in a SAG-AFTRA union vote than Papa from Stranger Things. Despite writing off the criticisms and defending the deal on the day after Thanksgiving, just 2 weeks after the tentative deal was reached, Fran Drescher and the SAG-AFTRA union released the full tentative agreement for the membership to review. And the reason that that agreement was released is because many members wanted to read the actual full terms of the deal before they voted. And that's where we are right now. So the tentative deal was reached. The SAG-AFTRA board approved the deal to go to union membership for a vote, but it is a very lengthy process. For the Writers Guild, it only took a few days to get the members to vote because it's a much smaller union. SAG-AFTRA has over 150,000 members, so the ratification vote actually opened back on November 14th, but doesn't close until this Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific time, which means that any number of actors have not yet voted, and they wanted to know exactly what they were agreeing to or agreeing not to abide by. And while it may be hard to believe given the ruinous length of the actor strike, it's also becoming very clear that there is significant opposition inside the membership of SAG-AFTRA to many terms of the deal, and specifically the terms around artificial intelligence. So let's take a look at what the deal is that's in front of actors right now for a vote, the provisions that the negotiators were able to get, and what exactly it is about the AI deal that many actors don't seem to like. Let's start first with the minimum pay increase. The SAG-AFTRA initial proposal asked for an 11% increase in minimum pay across the board in year one, with a 4% increase in the second year of the contract and another 4% increase in the third year of the contract. The final deal includes a 7% increase for actors in the first year of the deal, a 4% increase in year two, and a 3.5% increase in year three. Background actors, or extras, get an 11% increase in pay in that first year of the deal, with that 4% and 3.5% raise in years 2 and 3. And this final deal is actually much closer to the terms that the AMPTP offered before the strike began. They'd offered a 5% increase in the first year of the deal. SAG-AFTRA wanted an 11% increase, and they settled out at 7%. This appears to be one place where the actors union gave a little bit more ground, probably in order to get concessions somewhere else, perhaps that overall larger bump in pay for the background actors. There were also several proposals on the table regarding equity, including stunt performers matching the age, race, and/or gender of the actor being doubled, and hair and makeup services available for actors of all ethnicities. In the final deal, it was agreed that stunt coordinators must attempt to hire performers matching the age, gender, and/or race of the actor they're doubling. If one can't be found, the coordinator is then to inform the union, who can help with that search. All performers are also being offered consultations with hair and makeup artists to ensure that proper equipment and materials are available for their complexion, their skin color, their hair type, etc. There's also a 2-hour reimbursement now being given to actors who have to have hair and makeup work done off-site because professionals can't deal with their particular needs. And SAG-AFTRA has agreed to meet with IATSE, which is the union covering hair and makeup artists, by the end of this year to discuss expanding the pool of makeup and hair artists to ensure that everyone is able to get the services that they need. There were also some proposals on the table regarding self-tapes. So these would be auditions that actors record in their own homes and then send to casting directors in lieu of auditioning in person. SAG-AFTRA had been seeking a turnaround time that excluded weekends and holidays, a 5 4/8 page limit for a first audition, and the availability of virtual and in-person auditions on request. By the final deal terms, a 48-hour turnaround time was agreed to, excluding weekends and holidays. The page limit for the first self-tape was set at 8 pages, with 12 pages set for the second self-tape. Memorization is not required or allowed to be requested of actors for self-tapes, and producers must allow Zoom or in-person auditions at a time of the producer's choosing if requested. Those are given out on a first-come, first-served basis, and these clauses all sunset or expire at the end of this 3-year contract, which basically means that the producers and the guild are going to try out these policies. If they work just fine, then they'll be added to the next contract. If they don't work for some reason, then it's back open to negotiation. Performance capture was also on the table in this negotiation. Performance capture actors who are given direction by a project's director or a second unit director are now recognized as eligible actors under contract. So these would be people like Andy Serkis doing his work for Gollum or the Planet of the Apes movies, or Benedict Cumberbatch doing his work as Smaug in the Hobbit films. Not falling under this contract would be motion capture actors. Motion capture actors would be people that have all of the tennis balls and stuff attached to their bodies, but they're not being given direction as actors would be. They're basically just having their motion captured and tracked for computer purposes or visual effects purposes. That does not count, but if you are performing in a digital performance with all of this stuff attached to you, you are now considered an actor under the AMPTP contract. This is a win for the Actors Guild because it's exactly what they wanted. Streaming residuals were a huge issue in this negotiation. It was actually reportedly the issue that caused talks to break down back in October before the two sides reconvened to hammer out this tentative deal. And the deal that the actors got wasn't exactly the deal that they had been seeking. Initially, the actors were seeking a 2% revenue share from all streamers in order for that to be distributed to actors who appeared on streaming shows. There were a lot of different variations of this flat revenue sharing system that the AMPTP turned down. At one point, SAG-AFTRA said, okay, well, we'll take a certain amount of money per subscriber, and that was something that the streamers definitely didn't want. And what SAG-AFTRA ended up with was basically the same deal that the Writers Guild got. They did get a base residual increase based on the number of subscribers in overseas markets, but as far as residuals for streaming shows, they got the same bonus that the WGA did, which is that if a show is watched by 20% of a streamer's domestic subscribers in the first 90 days, then that bonus residual will be paid out. It's equal to 100% of an actor's existing residuals. However, they don't get all of the money. 75% of that streaming bonus goes directly to the actor, and 25% of the streaming bonus goes to a fund that will be governed by SAG-AFTRA and a number of trustees that will be distributed to other actors appearing on streaming programming. So the idea is that the actors directly involved in the show get part of that bonus, but that wealth is also spread to other actors that may be on shows that don't qualify, or perhaps actors on the same show that don't have deals that are as good as the lead actors. It really is a way to try to spread that streaming wealth in a different way than what SAG-AFTRA initially wanted. It should also be noted that it was negotiated that no shows be grandfathered in under the old system. So Stranger Things, for example, will have to abide by the terms of this deal if it hits that 20% of domestic subscribers, which it most certainly will when that final season premieres. It can't duck out of these terms because it premiered on Netflix before this agreement was reached. Now, it is good for the actors that they were able to secure a streaming residual, but from an outsider's perspective, I think that this is a place where the union gave up a lot of ground, because when those talks broke down back in October, Duncan Crabtree Ireland was specifically asked why the union didn't take the same kind of deal for the streaming residual that the WGA took. And he said, quote, "The philosophy of it is fine, but the structure of the residual doesn't work for our members." And this appears to be an area where the union saw that they were never going to get anything close to what they were asking, and they had a choice to make. Will they prolong the strike and hope to move the immovable object, or will they take the best deal that they think they can get? Duncan Crabtree Ireland has openly said that he believed that SAG-AFTRA was at its peak point of leverage when they settled the deal, because if it had gone on further, then the fall TV season would already have been lost, the spring movie season would already have been lost, and the studios and AMPTP wouldn't really have needed to hurry up and make a deal. They could have protracted the strike even more weeks and even more months, and so he felt that this was a time to make a deal. It appears that this is the deal that the union thought that it could get, but it is not the deal, I think, that they wanted. Streaming data was also a big issue. SAG-AFTRA made various proposals regarding full disclosure of streaming data from the streamers themselves, or data that was provided by third-party analysts. All of those proposals were rejected. In the final deal, SAG-AFTRA will receive quarterly reports from streamers disclosing hours streamed in the US and Canada, as well as quarterly reports on foreign streaming as that information is known or available to the streamers. Those reports are due within 90 days of the end of each quarter, but they will not become public. This information will be kept confidential and can be disclosed to a maximum of 6 people inside SAG-AFTRA. So this will be very closely guarded information internally, but there are already services like Nielsen that are getting better at tracking this kind of thing. Netflix provides its own global numbers week to week. So I think that we are moving towards a place where we're going to know more and more about these streaming ratings. But as far as the public getting these actual internal reports from the streamers, you can forget about that. There were a few miscellaneous deal items that were also settled. Martin Luther King Jr. Day and Juneteenth were recognized as official contractual holidays under the new agreement. Producers are now required to use their best efforts to hire intimacy coordinators, to consider requests for coordinators from performers, and not to penalize any performer requesting an intimacy coordinator on set. Background actors will now be informed of any nudity or sex acts being depicted in a show or movie at the time of their audition. If such acts are added to the script, the actors will be informed no less than 48 hours before their call time, and there's also a provision that if they are not informed in a timely manner, they are able to decline the job on the spot and walk away without penalty and with a day's pay. And finally, stunt coordinators getting a bit of a residual. They get a day's pay at the performer minimum per program, episode, or part of a series in which they are working but are not employed as an on-camera performer. This is another step to raise the visibility and compensation for stunt performers inside of the actors union. And there are a lot of other provisions and details that I haven't gotten into. It would be a very long video if I got into all of the contractual things that were decided upon. However, I really want to dive into the provisions around artificial intelligence, because this is where so much of the controversy has sprung up around this deal. Let's look first of all at what SAG-AFTRA was seeking when it comes comes to AI. They wanted comprehensive provisions to protect the work of actors and require informed consent and compensation for the use of digital replicas or alterations in voice, performance, and likeness. And the final deal contains various proposals covering the use of digital replicas, digital background actors, synthetic performers, and digital alterations, with an agreement to begin discussions around artificial intelligence 6 months prior to the expiration of the next contract in 2026. Yes, they are contractually required to get a head start on this because it seems very obvious that both sides are going to have a lot to talk about, even though they were able to come up with some sort of common ground in this contract. So there are a few different aspects to talk about regarding artificial intelligence and how it affects actors. And let's start with digital replication and digital alterations. And this is kind of a preface to this segment that you can find in that final contract. It says, quote, "To the extent practicable, producers shall endeavor to comply with the provisions of this section. The parties acknowledge that the producers have historically used digital technologies to replicate or alter a performer's voice or likeness, e.g. CGI, audio-visual effects, during all stages of motion picture production, e.g. pre-visualization, pre-production, production, post-production, distribution, marketing, and may continue to do so consistent with their historical practices." And this statement right here already has a lot of people saying, well, wait a minute, you're giving up too much ground here, because you're basically saying, well, you already use this technology anyway, and we're going to give you permission to keep using it inside of the boundaries of your historical practice and what you're already doing. It is very nebulous, and it does leave a lot of room for interpretation and a lot of gray area, and that scares a lot of the actors because they're saying these producers are going to try to exploit this, to use it as a loophole, and to go around what provisions we were able to get in this contract. Let's talk a little bit about digital replicas. A digital replica is a replica of a performer's voice or likeness that is created with the actor's physical participation for a movie that is covered under the contract for the purpose of video and or audio that the actor did not physically perform. So basically, if Tom Hanks comes in and a digital replica of himself is created for this part of the movie, we're going to do it with CG. So we want to get your voice and we want to get your likeness, but the actual image that you're going to see on screen is not corporeally Tom Hanks, but it is Tom Hanks's performance. The likeness was captured with Tom Hanks physically present. That is a digital replica. And when it comes to digital replicas, actors must be informed and consent to the creation and use of a digital replica of themselves. Consent must be given if the replica is used in footage or dialogue that is different from what the performer has provided. So you can't take Tom Hanks's digital replica and have it perform script pages that he's never seen unless it is substantially similar to the script pages that he has seen. Otherwise, you have to go back and get permission again. I think that this is a pretty strong guarantee and probably something that the studios didn't want to give up. This consent for the use of a digital replica will remain valid, however, even in the case of the performer's death. So it is possible that if Tom Hanks were in a movie, and I don't even want to put this out there, but he were to pass away in the middle of this movie, if he consented to the creation of a digital replica, then technically you could use that replica to finish Tom Hanks's performance in the movie because he consented to the use of it before he died. I mentioned the language, though, that has a lot of people on edge because they're worried that producers are going to use it to exploit them. And this was a particular passage that I found. This is the actual contractual language. And if anybody else can figure this out, please let me know down in the comments below, because this is the kind of thing that I would be worried about if I were an actor reading this actual deal. So if a digital replica is used to replace an actor, if the scene is work the performer would have done in person, the performer would get paid except when, quote, the performer's compensation would have covered the work had the performer performed the scene or scenes in person based on the form of engagement. E.g., no compensation is due if a major role performer employed on a 1-hour television motion picture works for 3 days and the performer's employment-based digital replica is used to perform the equivalent of another 3 days of work, or if the employment-based digital replica of a series contract performer is used to perform work that could have been performed by the series contract performer in person within the work time and overall production period covered by the series contract performer's contract of employment. What the hell that paragraph even means or is trying to say, I have no idea. And yes, I would be reticent to sign off on that. I would have to call my lawyer and say, What does this mean? That is mumbo jumbo. It is impenetrable, and that does kind of put me on my toes a little bit. A couple of other notes regarding digital replicas. The use of a digital replica can only occur in the movie it was created for, unless otherwise approved. So you could not make your Tom Hanks digital replica and stick him in the sequel without his consent. However, if the actor is deceased, the estate can grant consent, and the actor/estate will be paid the minimum day rate or salary to which they would be compensated under the current contract at that time. So again, returning to it, Tom Hanks makes a digital replica for a movie. The movie comes out. They want to make a sequel using that replica. If Tom Hanks has passed away between movies, they can go to his estate. They can ask permission. They pay his estate as if he were an actor in that movie, and they can then use that replica in the film. There's also something called an independently created digital replica. This is a replica created for a film in which the performer was not employed. One of the closest analogies I can think of would be Peter Cushing in Rogue One. I think that would probably count as an independently created digital replica, even though I know that there was some motion capture that was also involved with that. Consent must be granted by the actor or the actor's estate. However, quote, no consent is required when the use is of the type protected by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, including but not limited to instances when the First Amendment would protect a use for purposes of comment, criticism, scholarship, satire, or parody, or would protect a use in a docudrama or historical or biographical work. And I'm sorry, I again would be very suspicious if I were signing a deal that said no consent is required under any circumstances when it regards a digital replica of myself or someone that I know or love. That First Amendment argument is something that I often use for this channel. If I get demonetized for a video that is a breakdown of a movie, I can say, no, this is comment and criticism, it's fair use. How that applies to something that might be covered under the AMPTP contract, I'm not really sure, and I don't really think I want to know, because it does seem like a loophole. You could say, oh no, I can use this Tom Hanks digital replica because this is a parody, it's a satire, it's comment or criticism, and it's covered under the First Amendment, so I don't need his consent. That is a little weird for me. Let's move on now to digital alterations. So this is not the creation of a full replica. This would be where an artist goes in and changes the look of an actor, their eyebrow movement or their eye movement, or even the motion of their lips to make them say something, or the manipulation of their spoken audio to make it say something that the actor didn't say. And the guidance is pretty clear here. It says consent is required if digital alterations are made to photography or sound unless it is substantially scripted. So that's pretty easy, right? Open and shut. Let's move on. Until, of course, you get to the but. But, quote, the producer need not obtain the consent of the performer to perform post-production alterations, editing, arranging, rearranging, revising, or manipulating a photography and or soundtrack for purposes of cosmetics, wardrobe, noise reduction, timing or speed, continuity, picture tone, clarity, addition of visuals/sound effects or filters, standards and practices, ratings and adjustment in dialogue or narration, or other similar purposes, or under any circumstance when dubbing or use of a double is permitted under the codified basic agreement or television agreement. And yes, a lot of these are standard boilerplate things that you need to be able to manipulate an actor's image for. However, many actors are saying that this is a very long and broad list of exceptions to the consent agreement when it comes to digitally altering an actor's performance that the producers could hide behind. And there's one thing that's explicitly stated in the agreement that I think many actors would have a big problem with. No consent is required for altering lip movement or voice, for foreign language dubs, or for changes necessary for license or sale to another market, including altering dialogue to adhere to cultural norms in another country. This is a huge issue when it comes to the global release of films. There have been big Marvel and Disney movies, for example, that have been criticized for cutting down or removing LGBTQ plus content from markets where it is not considered morally acceptable. And if you're an actor that's approving this deal, you are technically saying that a studio can, without your consent, alter your image and your voice to potentially remove references to those issues, things that you may care about very passionately yourself, from markets where it's not considered appropriate. Again, if I were an actor, I would have a very big problem with this. Let's move on now to digital background actors. So this would be using digital actors as extras, basically, to fill out crowd scenes and the like. Background actors must be informed 48 hours before they are asked to have a digital replica created of themselves, and that replica may only be used in the film for which it was created unless the actor gives consent. This was a big fear going into the strike. Many people that make a living as background actors said, well, you can scan me once and then use that image image in every movie from here to eternity, and you never have to hire me again. Under the provisions of this contract, technically the studios cannot do that. They can only use it for the movie that they've already scanned you for. The deal also says, quote, digital replication of background actors will not be used in lieu of hiring background actors necessary to fulfill the applicable coverage maximums for the scenes to be photographed. A producer shall not use the background actor digital replica of a background actor to circumvent the engagement of that background actor. That's a nice guarantee. I think it would be tough perhaps in practice to prove whether or not a producer has to use the actual actor, but it would give me a little bit of comfort knowing that there is at least some language in there that's saying that a producer is supposed to hire you and not just use my digital scan, pay me for 1 day, and use my digital replica for 15 days. Now in practice, we'll see how this actually works, and I think it's a big reason why SAG-AFTRA and the AMPTP are going to be meeting about this 6 months ahead of the expiration of the next contract, because I think there's going to be a lot to talk about. Finally, when it comes to the AI issue, we have synthetic performers. Now, what is a synthetic performer? It is a digitally created asset intended to be a natural performer who is not recognizable as any natural performer, is not voiced by a natural person, is not a digital replica, and for which an agreement is not in place with a natural performance for the role being played. Essentially, it is a character in the movie that is wholly the creation of a computer. There is no involvement at any step as far as the on-screen appearance of this character by an actor in any way, shape, or form, and it's what a lot of actors are scared of, the fact that they will be replaced entirely by synthetic performers that are generated by AI. And generative AI is something that a lot of actors are worried about, and if I were an actor reading this deal, I don't think I would be a lot less worried about it. The deal says that producers agree to meet with SAG-AFTRA, quote, regularly to discuss compensation, if any, regarding existing work that's being used to train generative AI to create synthetic performers. And I have a huge problem with that, or I would if I were an actor, because this is basically giving producers the green light to use everybody's performance to train a computer to generate a synthetic AI performer that is not to be compensated under any common scale, and to use an actor's work in order to achieve that goal with no guarantee of compensation. And the only guarantee really is a meeting to discuss if there will be compensation. And I can guarantee you right now how that meeting is going to go. The answer will be no. I think this to me is a big loss for SAG-AFTRA. The fact that they are basically saying you can use generative AI and we'll talk about what compensation we might be owed. That's a big red flag for me. And I think that this is somewhere, if I were an actor, that I would say that the union somewhat failed me in this negotiation. Now, I'm not an actor. SAG-AFTRA is not my union. It could very well be that if you were in the union, if you're an actor, you feel differently for some reason. I can only look at the deal from my perspective, but I don't like this provision or this clause at all. And I think that people that are publicly criticizing it actually have some pretty solid ground to stand on. I don't think it's all the personal vendetta of the Matthew Modines of the world. Now, compensation would be required if a synthetic performer is created that is recognizable as a real actor or a combination of real actors, either intentionally or unintentionally. So if a computer accidentally replicates Tom Hanks, well, at least he's going to get a paycheck. And there's a provision that says, quote, the parties acknowledge the importance of human performance in motion pictures and the potential impact on employment under this agreement. For those reasons, the producer agrees to give the union notice and an opportunity to bargain in good faith over appropriate consideration, if any, if a synthetic performer is used in place of a performer who would have been engaged under this agreement in a human role. The parties acknowledge that the producers have customarily used digital technologies to generate non-human characters without the services of a performer covered under this agreement, and that the foregoing does not apply to such uses. So this is kind of a 1-2 punch. One of them is a return to that language that we saw at the beginning, which basically says, hey, we also acknowledge that they're using this technology anyway, and so if this is under the umbrella of what they're already doing, then none of this applies, which could be interpreted very broadly. And the other one is one of those non-agreement agreements that basically says, well, you know what? If in a year and a half, generative AI is able to replace all actors with synthetic actors, then the producers will negotiate in good faith with SAG-AFTRA to talk about if there's any kind of compensation that's due. And again, I can tell you the answer to that is going to be no. So this is kind of the sticky wicket here with this deal. It's the AI provisions, which I don't think are exceptionally strong, and I don't think that SAG-AFTRA really was able to negotiate either from a place of strength or get very strong guarantees, and I understand why there are so many actors that are concerned about this. There aren't a whole lot of assurances in this deal that producers aren't going to replace them or use their work to train the things that may replace them in the future. And there have been a lot of people vocally saying that they will not vote for this deal because of these AI provisions. And that begs the question, well, what does happen if over half of SAG-AFTRA says that they don't want this deal and they reject it outright? What happens next? Well, first of all, the strike doesn't automatically resume. It's not like everybody has to grab their signs and get back out on the picket lines. Basically, what happens is that the deal reverts back to the old deal, the one that was just renegotiated, and actors will still continue to work under the 2020 agreement between the AMPTP and SAG-AFTRA. The union negotiators would then return to the negotiating table with the AMPTP to try to get a better deal. Now, if that doesn't happen, and if SAG-AFTRA believes that their only recourse is to ask for another strike authorization, then we basically reset the clocks back to the summer. We have an impasse between SAG-AFTRA and the AMPTP. They go to the union to ask for a strike authorization vote. If the union says that they'll go on strike, then they go on strike, and we start this whole process over again, maybe just over AI, but this seems to be the big dividing issue between these two sides. Now, will this actually happen? In my personal opinion, I think that it is possible, but I don't think that it is very likely. Now, I do think that we are going to see a much larger opposition to this deal than we normally see. There's always buzz that there's going to be a voting bloc that's going to vote against some of these deals when the unions are voting whether or not they're going to accept a deal that the negotiators have gotten, but it's usually something like 5 or 10% maybe. I think that you could maybe see the results of this go down to like a 60-40 vote, which is a lot closer than I think Fran Drescher or Duncan Crabtree Ireland or anybody on the SAG-AFTRA negotiating team want it to go to, but as long as it passes, then the deal will fall into place. I would be somewhat surprised if the majority of SAG-AFTRA rejects the deal just because the strike was so long and because the business is in such dire straits and because so many of those actors need to get back to work. I think a lot of them will have serious reservations about this deal. They will approve it, but they will also be vocally lobbying the union in the next 2.5 years before they go back to the negotiating table to shore up and strengthen these AI provisions. Now, some people say 2.5 years, 3 years, that's too long. The technology will have advanced too much by then and the window will close. So could it happen? Yes. Will it happen? I don't think that it will, but I think it's going to be a lot closer than anybody really wants it to be. And when we look at this deal overall, I think a lot of it is the product of good negotiating, some give and take stuff. I think they got a lot of advancement as far as base pay and some conditions for things like self-tapes. The AI provisions, I would say this round at least, were a loss for SAG-AFTRA. They were looking for a lot of assurances that they didn't get. And the streaming residual, I would say, is maybe a neutral outcome because SAG-AFTRA wanted so much initially, and they chased after that revenue share so much that to basically accept what the WGA got, I mean, listen, in a vacuum, that's a good thing, and the WGA certainly seemed to be happy with it, but because Duncan Crabtree Ireland and SAG-AFTRA were so publicly critical of that as far as the model for the SAG-AFTRA union, I think that that has to be looked at as a bit of a loss as well. However, they were able to get something. So overall, I think it's much more of a mixed bag for SAG-AFTRA as far as these negotiations than it was for the Writers Guild of America, which seemed to get pretty much everything that they wanted to some degree or another. And I think there are going to be a lot of people who are very anxious in Hollywood as that Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific deadline approaches to see if this deal passes and just what the margin will be. Of course, I will be covering it right here on the channel. And thanks so much for spending so much time watching this extensive recap of legal documents. I enjoy doing it, but I'm glad that there are at least a few people out there that enjoy watching it as well. As always, stay tuned right here. I'm doing a lot of catch up from my New Zealand trip, including several reviews of movies, award movies, some movies that already came out, new movies, and the return of Charts with Dan on Tuesday. I have a whole month of very eventful box office news to catch up on, and I will be covering it in depth. So there's a lot of great stuff coming up in the next few days. Thanks for spending part of your day here with me. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.